In this video, we will be exploring who Otzi the Iceman was during his lifetime, whilst looking at aspects of the world he inhabited. For the uninitiated, Otzi is the nickname given to a remarkably well-preserved ancient mummy discovered by a pair of hikers in 1991 in the Otzi Alps, close to the Italian-Austrian border. When archaeologists exhumed the mummy from the ice which had entombed him, they retrieved a plethora of the man's belongings, which were also in remarkable condition. These items included clothing, tools, weapons, a backpack, and even treatments for ailments. Carbon dating confirmed that Otzi lived about 5,300 years ago, during the Chalcolithic, or Copper Age, which is regarded as somewhat of a transition period between the Stone and Bronze Ages. In the decades since his discovery, Otzi has been described as the archaeological sensation of the 20th century, because no other discovery has illuminated our understanding of the late Stone Age in quite the same way. Otzi's appearance. Compared to the average modern European man, Otzi was relatively small, although his dimensions are quite typical of men who lived around the same time as him. He stood at 1.6 meters tall, that's 5 foot 2.5 inches, and weighed about 50 kilograms. Clumps of hair found near his body indicate that he had long brown tresses and a beard. Otzi had a diastema, or gap, between his upper incisors. Analyses of Otzi's bones indicate that he was about 45 years of age when he died, which would have been relatively old for one living during the Chalcolithic. Despite his age, he was robust and has been described by some researchers as possessing the musculature of an Olympic wrestler, although personally I think that such a physique would have been hard to achieve for someone who did not have the access to the amounts of protein that many of us enjoy today. And if the average height of Europeans back then was anything to go by, Otzi probably didn't have access to those quantities of food. Nevertheless, he was sinewy with relatively large leg muscles, which may have been the result of countless mountain treks. Such physical features, along with the possessions he was carrying, have led to various theories concerning Otzi's occupation. What was Otzi's occupation? Some have theorized that Otzi was a hunter. The fact that he had weapons seems to support this notion, until one considers their condition. His bow was longer than he was tall and would have been a lethal weapon had it not required further work. Not only did it probably need to be shortened and planed, it was not yet ready to accommodate a bowstring. In addition, of the 14 arrows found in Otzi's quiver, only 2 were finished. The other 12 lacked arrowheads and had not been smoothed down. Otzi clearly intended to finish them at a later stage, but one cannot help wonder whether a true hunter would have been equipped with better weapons. Others believe that Otzi was a shepherd who practiced transhumance, the action of moving livestock from one grazing ground to another. In many parts of the world, this practice still takes place, with animals being led to rich mountain pastures during warmer months. It is certainly plausible that Otzi did this, and his equipment suggests that he might have been prepared for lengthy periods away from home. Also supporting this theory is the fact that he was discovered near a mountain pass, which leads to high-altitude grasslands. Such a route, however, might also have been familiar to a metalsmith or miner. There were numerous copper ore deposits a few days north of where Otzi was found, such as those near the modern-day town of Schwarz in Austria. Evidence suggests that they were mined during the Bronze Age, although it is possible that they were first exploited during the Copper Age. At the advent of the latter, mining probably involved simply scraping ore away from rocky surfaces, but over time, miners would have had to dig tunnels in order to pursue the ore deeper into the rock, and this process could have well spanned generations. There are other clues which support the notion that Otzi might have been a metalsmith. Traces of arsenic and copper were found in his hair, suggesting he was probably involved in the smelting process. Having originated in the Near East, the practices of mining and smelting copper were widespread in and around the Alpine region during Otzi's time. This is supported by numerous finds in the region that date from the 4th millennium BC, including Otzi's famous copper axe. Being a metalworker would have also conferred status on an individual, and Otzi's axe suggests that he was a respected member of his tribe. Otzi's weapons must have been particularly prized because such axes are quite rare, and the ore that went into making his came all the way from Tuscany. This suggests that a complex trading network spanning vast distances existed during the Copper Age. Those who disagree that Otzi worked with metal point out that traces of Copper and arsenic, or the traces of copper and arsenic in his hair, were very small. Such amounts suggest that he may have been in the vicinity when smelting was taking place rather than being involved in the process. The fact is, we can't be sure whether Otzi even had a single occupation because we do not have a clear picture of the social order in Copper Age Europe. Perhaps people back then adopted different roles depending on the season, although the level of skill required to make Otzi's axe, for example, suggests that specialists had begun to appear during this era. Where was Otzi from? Isotopic analyses of Otzi's teeth and bones reveal that he lived in two different places during his lifetime, and that both locations were on the southern side of the Alps in modern-day Italy. During his childhood, Otzi lived close to Bolzano, which is the reason he has been on display in the city's South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology since 1998. Later in Otzi's life, however, he relocated to the Venosta Valley about 40 kilometers away. This valley, which lies at the foot of the Alps, is just a few short days away from the aforementioned mines. Its inhabitants may very well have sourced their copper from those sites. Archaeologists have conducted detailed excavations of a Copper Age village in the Venosta Valley that may very well have been Otzi's adulthood home. These excavations have revealed that the inhabitants of the village cultivated pea, einkorn wheat, and emmer, amongst other crops. They kept goats and sheep primarily, along with some cattle and pigs. Their diet, therefore, largely consisted of grain and slaughtered livestock, but was supplemented through hunting and foraging. Post holes in the ground indicate that the inhabitants of the village lived in oblong houses, and their dead were buried in caves. Was Otzi healthy, and how did he die? Further detailed examinations of Otzi's body have revealed that he suffered from a litany of health problems. These ailments include whipworm, which would probably have caused him severe abdominal pain. This infection may account for the lines which can still be seen on Otzi's fingernails. Known as Bow's lines, they indicate that Otzi was sick in the months before he passed away. He had 2 pieces of tree fungus amongst his belongings, and it's interesting to note that tree fungus possesses antibiotic qualities. It's therefore very possible that these were intended to treat his illness. In addition, Otzi had Lyme disease, although he may not have been symptomatic. A lifetime of sitting next to fires had also given him blackened lungs, and he suffered from hardening of the arteries. This last affliction has surprised scientists and challenged the notion that such health problems are exclusively modern. Throughout his lifetime, Otzi had also broken a number of bones, including his nose and several ribs. His joints had suffered some degeneration during his lifetime and may have caused him pain. This may account for the tattoos that he famously possesses. There are 61 of these simple, linear markings on Otzi's body. They were probably created using a needle, perhaps one made of bone, that inserted pigments under his skin, and they likely served a therapeutic purpose. Even in the present day, practitioners of folk medicine sometimes tattoo their patients' joints to alleviate pain. Otzi's tattoos are on his lower back, lower legs, and left wrist, areas of the body that when x-rayed were revealed to be slightly damaged. What is fascinating is that Otzi's markings bear a striking resemblance to some of those on 2 other remarkably well-preserved mummies who lived 3,000 years after Otzi. These mummies are from Russia, and they are known as the Princess of Utok and the Pazyryk Chief. They possess remarkably intricate tattoos that were too advanced to be on a body as old as Otzi's. However, both mummies also have clusters of markings on them which are uncannily similar to some of those on Otzi, primarily to the left of their spines. One might assume, therefore, that the back tattoos on Otzi and both Kurgans were intended to mitigate the impact that their hard lives took on their bodies. None of the illnesses or injuries mentioned above, however, led to Otzi's death. Before we look at what killed him, I must point out that he died whilst on a journey. Various types of pollen found at different altitudes were identified in Otzi's digestive tract after he consumed them unwittingly. These pollens indicate that he died in late spring, early summer, and reveal that he was near to high-altitude forests roughly 33 hours prior to his death, although he appears to have descended to a far lower location, possibly his village, 9 to 12 hours before his demise. Oddly, the contents of Otzi's stomach reveal that he returned to high ground to eat his final meal, a piece of einkorn bread, along with some ibex and red deer meat, before ascending further still. Now this journey entailed a lot of violence, and Otzi's death was just that, violent. Traces of 4 other people's blood had been found on his clothing and weapons, and he had a deep cut between his thumb and forefinger, indicating that he was involved in hand-to-hand combat shortly before his death. Interestingly, several species of moss had been found in the gully that Otzi died in, and it's possible that some of it was used to staunch the bleeding from this particular wound. Otzi may have even been aware that some of these mosses possessed antibacterial qualities. Before his death, Otzi also sustained a heavy blow to the head that could have resulted in brain damage, but does not appear to have killed him. That honour goes to a wound Otzi received around the same time as the head injury. A flint-tipped arrow was shot into his back, just below his left shoulder, severing his subclavian artery. This would have led to very heavy bleeding, but some time may have elapsed before Otzi finally succumbed. The arrow shaft was removed by either himself or a companion. Its head, however, would remain inside his body until it was spotted close to one of Otzi's lungs by scientists examining him in 2001, a whole 10 years after his discovery. Prior to that, the actual cause of his death was unknown, although foul play was strongly suspected. Of course, we'll never know who killed him, or who the blood on his clothing belonged to. Was Otzi feuding with his own kin, or a neighbouring tribe who had fallen out with his people? Had he returned to his village to find that it had been raided before fleeing said raiders? This last question is particularly compelling when one considers the era in which Otzi lived. During the last phase of the Stone Age, which is known as the Neolithic, humans started practicing agriculture and animal husbandry. Naturally, tending to crops and livestock precluded a nomadic lifestyle by forcing people to remain in one place all year round. Whilst trading networks were set up between tribes willing to negotiate with one another, the accumulation of resources in one place would have made villages very enticing to rivals. For this reason, some researchers consider the Neolithic and the Copper Age, which it encompasses, as more violent than any eras that preceded them. One archaeological example that emphasizes how brutal Neolithic Europe could be is the mass grave at Talheim in Germany. In a pit no more than 3 meters long, the bodies of 34 individuals, 18 adults and 16 children, were discovered, all bearing the hallmarks of a violent death. Most were killed with axes and cudgels, victims of a raiding party whose main aim was plunder. Did Otzi return to his village after one of his forays in the Alps, only to discover that his people had suffered a similar fate to those in Talheim? Was he then chased back up into the mountains before being murdered? I'm speculating, but I don't think this scenario can be dismissed. Did Otzi have a family, and does he have any descendants? We don't know who Otzi's loved ones were, or whether he had a family of his own. It's also unclear whether he has descendants alive today. DNA analysis reveals he is more closely related to modern Sardinians than Central Europeans, although this does not necessarily prove that he has descendants on the island. Otzi and the islanders of today may instead share common ancestors. It's interesting to note that genetic analyses have revealed that Otzi's paternal ancestors shared DNA with prehistoric farmers from Sweden as well as Bulgaria. Whilst this does not necessarily indicate that Otzi's father travelled from one of these places, it might be plausible when one considers the distance some Copper Age traders must have travelled. It's also easy to imagine such a nomad settling in the Alps after falling for a prospective spouse, and DNA from Otzi's maternal side indicates that his mother was from the Alpine region. That concludes this video. My name's SD Reeve and I'm an historical fiction author. My most recent novel is entitled The Coppersmith, and it's the untold story of the subject of this video, the man who had come to be known the world over as Otzi the Iceman. It's fictitious, so it contains plenty of drama and conjecture, but the author's notes at the back of the book go into much more detail about Otzi, the world he inhabited, the discovery itself, etc. Now, whether or not you agree with any of the takes in this video, feel free to comment. I'd also be grateful if you could subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.